Story tonight: The Colony of Cats. Long, long ago, as far back as the time when animals spoke, there lived a community of cats in a deserted house they had taken possession of not far from a large town. They had everything they could possibly desire for their comfort. They were well fed and well lodged, and if by any chance an unlucky mouse was stupid enough to venture in their way, they caught it, not to eat it, but for the pure pleasure of catching it. The old people of the town related how they had heard their parents speak of a time when the whole country was so overrun with rats and mice that there was not so much as a grain of corn, nor an ear of maize to be gathered in the fields, and it might be out of gratitude to the cats who had rid the country of these plagues that their descendants were allowed to live there in peace. No one knows where they got the money to pay for everything, nor who paid it, for all this happened so very long ago. But one thing is certain: they were rich enough to keep a servant, for though they lived very happily together and did not scratch nor fight more than human beings would have done, they were not clever enough to do their housework themselves, and preferred all of the events to have someone to cook their meat, which they would have scorned to eat raw. Not only were they very difficult to please about the housework, but most women quickly tired of living alone with only cats for companions. Consequently, they never kept a servant long, and it had become a saying in the town, when anyone found herself reduced to her last penny, "I will go and live with the cats." And so many a poor woman actually did. Now Lizeno was not happy at home, for her mother, who was a widow, was much fonder of her elder daughter, so that often the younger one fared very badly and had not enough to eat, while the elder could have everything she desired. When Lizena dared to complain, she was certain to have a good beating. At last the day came when she was at the end of her courage and patience, and exclaimed to her mother and sister, "As you all hate me so much, you'll be glad to be rid of me. I'm going to go and live with the cats." "Be off with you!" cried her mother, seizing an old broom handle from behind the door. Poor Lindsay did not wait to be told twice, but ran off at once, and never stopped until she reached the door to the cat's house. Their cook had left them that very morning, with her face all scratched, as a result of such a quarrel with the head of the house that had very nearly scratched out her eyes. Zena, therefore, was warmly welcomed, and she set at work to prepare the dinner, not without many misgivings as to the taste of cats, and whether she would be able to satisfy them. Going to and fro about her work, she found herself frequently hindered by the constant succession of cats who appeared one after another in the kitchen to inspect the new servant. She had one in front of her feet, one perched on her back of a chair while she peeled the vegetables. A third sat on the table beside her, and 5 or 6 others prowled about among the pots and pans on the shelves against the wall. The air resounded with their purring, which meant they were pleased with the new maid, but Rosanna had not yet learned to understand their language, and often she did not know what they wanted her to do. However, she was a good, kind-hearted girl, and she set to work to pick up the little kittens which tumbled about on the floor, and patched up quarrels, and nursed in a big lap with that big Tabby, the oldest of the community, which had a lame paw. All these kindnesses could hardly fail to make a favorable impression on those cats, and it was even better after a while when she had time to grow accustomed to their strange ways. Never had the house been kept so clean, their meat so well served, nor the sick cats so well cared for. After a time they had visited an old barn cat whom they called their father, who lived by himself in a barn at the top of a hill, and came down time after time to inspect the little colony. He, too, was much taken with Lavinia, and inquired on first seeing her, "Are you well served in this place, my little black-eyed person?" And the cats answered with one voice, "Oh, yes, Father Gatto. We have never had so good a servant." At each of his visits the answer was always the same, but after a time the old cat, who was very observant, noticed that the little maid had grown to look sadder and sadder. "What is the matter? My child has anyone come kind to you?" he asked one day, when he found her crying in the kitchen. She burst into tears and answered between her sobs, "Oh no, they are all very good to me, but I long for news from home, and I pine to see my mother and sister." Old Gato, being a sensible old cat, understood the little servant's feelings. "You shall go home," he said, "and you shall not come back until you please. But first you must be rewarded for all your kind services to my children. Follow me down into the inner cellar, where you have yet never seen, for I always keep it locked and carry the key away with me." Lavinia looked around her in amazement as they went down to the great vaulted cellar beneath the kitchen. Before her stood big earthenware water jars, one of which contained oil, and the other containing a liquid shining like gold. "And which of these jars shall I dip you?" asked Father Gato, with a grin that showed all of his sharp white teeth, while his mustaches stood straight on either side of his face. The little maid looked at the two jars from under her blonde dark lashes. "In the oil jar," she answered timidly, thinking to herself. "I could not ask to be bathed in gold." But Father Gato replied, "No, no, you deserve something better than that." And seizing her in his strong paws, he plunged her into liquid gold. Wonder and wonders, when Lavinia came out from the jar, she shone from head to foot like the sun in the heavens on a fiery summer day. Her pretty pink cheeks, her long black hair had kept their natural color. Otherwise, she would have become a statue of pure gold. Father Gato purred loudly with satisfaction. "Go home," he said, "and see your mother and sisters. But take care you do not hear, if you hear the cock crow, turn towards it. If, on the contrary, the ass brays, you must look the other way." The little maid, having gratefully kissed the white paw of the old cat, set off for home, and just as she got near her mother's house, the cock crowed. She quickly turned towards it. Immediately her beautiful golden hair appeared around her forehead, crowning her glossy black hair. At the same time, the ass began to bray, but Lizena took care not to look over the fence into the field where the donkey was feeding. Her mother and sister, who were in front of the house, uttered cries of admiration and astonishment when they saw her, and their cries became still louder when Licinia, taking her handkerchief from her pocket, drew out also a handful of gold. For some days the mother and her two daughters lived very happily together, and Licinia had given them everything she had brought away, except her golden clothing, for that would not come off, in spite of all the efforts of her sister, who was madly jealous of her good fortune. The golden star, too, could not be removed from her forehead, but all the gold pieces she drew from her pockets had found their way to her mother and sister. "Oh, now go and see if I can get out the pussies," said Peppina, the elder sister, one morning, and she took Liz's baskets and fastened her pockets into her own skirt. "I should like to have some of the cat's gold for myself," she thought, and she left her mother's house before the sun rose. The cat colony had not yet taken another servant, for they knew they could not get anyone to replace Licinia, whose loss they had not yet ceased to mourn. When they heard that Peppina was her sister, they all ran to meet her. "She is not the least like her," the kittens whispered amongst themselves. "Hush, be quiet," the older cat said. "All servants cannot be pretty." They decided she was not at all like Licinia. Even the most reasonable and large-minded of the cats soon acknowledged that. The very first day she shut the kitchen door in the face of a tomcat who used to enjoy watching Licinia at her work, and a young and mischievous cat who jumped in by the kitchen window and alighted on the table got such a blow with a rolling pin that he squalled for an hour. With every day that passed, the household became more and more aware of its misfortune. The work was done badly as the servants were surly and disagreeable. In the corners of the rooms there were collected heaps of dust, spiders' webs hung from the ceilings, and in front of the window panes the beds were hardly ever made, and the feather beds, so beloved by the old and feeble cats, had never once been shaken since Licinia left the house. At Father Gatto's next visit, he found the whole colony in a state of uproar. "Caesar has one paw so badly swollen that it looks as if it were broken," said one. "Peppina kicked him with her great wooden shoes on. Hector has an abscess in his back where the wooden chair was flung at him, and Agrippina's 3 little kittens have died of hunger beside their mother because Peppina forgot to get them in their basket up in the attic. There's no putting up with this creature. Send her away, Father Gatto. Zinnia herself would not be angry with us. She must know very well what her sister is like." "Come here," said Father Gatto in his most severe tones to Peppina, and he took her down to the cellar and showed her the same 2 great jars that he showed Zinnia. "In which of these shall I dip you?" he asked, and she made haste answered, "In the liquid gold," for she was no more modest than she was good or kind. Father Gatto's yellow eyes darted fire. "You have not deserved it," he uttered, in a voice like thunder, and seizing her, he flung her into the jar of oil, where she nearly suffocated. When she came to the surface screaming and struggling, the vengeful cat seized her again and rolled her in the ash heap on the floor. When she rose, dirty and blinded and disgusting to behold, he thrust her out from the door, saying, "Be gone! When you have met a braying ass, be careful to turn your head towards it." Stumbling and raging, Peppina set off for home, thinking herself fortunate to find a stick by the wayside in which to support herself. She was within sight of her mother's house when she heard in the meadow on the right the voice of a donkey braying loudly. Quickly she turned her head towards it, and at the same time her hand put up her forehead, where, wavering like a plume, was a donkey's tail. She ran home to her mother at the top of her speed, yelling with rage and despair, and it took Zinnia 2 hours with a big basin of hot water and 2 cakes of soap to rid her of the layers of ash with which Father Gatto had adorned her. As for the donkey's tail, it was impossible to get rid of that, as it was firmly fixed to her forehead, as was a golden star to Lasinia's. Their mother was furious. She first beat Lasinia unmercifully with a broom, then she took her to the mouth of the well and lowered her in, leaving her at the bottom, weeping and crying for help. Before this happened, however, the king's son, in passing the mother's house, had seen Lasinia sewing in the parlor, and had been dazzled by her beauty. After coming back 2 or 3 times, he at last ventured to approach the window and whisper in the softest voice, "Lovely maiden, will you be my bride?" And she had answered, "I will." Next morning, when the prince arrived to claim his bride, he found her wrapped in a large white veil. "Is it so that maidens receive their parents' hands?" said the mother, hoping to make the king's son marry Peppina in place of her sister, and had fastened the donkey's tail around her head, like a lock of her hair under the veil. The prince was young and a little timid, so he made no objections, and seated Peppina in the carriage beside him. Their way led past the old house inhabited by the cats, who were all in the window, for the report had got out that the prince was going to marry the most beautiful maiden in the world, on whose forehead shone a golden star. And they knew that this could only be their adored Lasinia. As the carriage slowly passed in front of the old house, where the cats from all parts of the world seemed to be gathered, a song burst out from every throat. "Mew, mew, mew, Prince, look quick behind you, and the well is fair Lasinia, and you've got nothing but Peppina." When he heard this, the coachman, who understood the cat's language better than the prince, his master, stopped the horse and asked, "Does your highness know what the Grimalkins are saying?" And the song broke forth again, louder than ever. With a turn of his hand, the prince threw back the veil and discovered the puffed-up, swollen face of Peppina, with the donkey's tail twisted around her head. "Ah, traitress!" he exclaimed, and ordering the horses to be turned around, he drove the elder daughter, quivering with rage, to the old woman who had sought to deceive him. With his hand on the hilt of his sword, he demanded Lasinia in so terrific a voice that the mother hastened to the well to draw her prisoner out. Lasinia's clothing and her gold star shone brilliantly when the prince led her home to the king, his father, and the whole palace was lit up. The next day they were married, and lived happily ever after. And the cats, headed by old Father Gatto, were present at the wedding.